Our next witness is Christine, is she?
It is, sir.
Christine, please.
Slightly wrong.
Please state your full name
Christine Norval.
and repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely
I do solemnly, sincerely,
and truly declare and affirm
and truly declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Christine, you're here to talk about the impact on you and your family of your husband Bruce's infection.
Yes, that's correct.
And we have a detailed witness statement from Bruce, and indeed from you and from each of your children. And I'm not going to ask you to speak to their statements, although there may be a couple of passages from them I refer to in the course of your evidence. In terms of background, Bruce has, as his statement explains to us, haemophilia B.
Yes.
And he has, over the course of many years, been treated with many factor 9 products.
Correct. Yes.
And I'm going to ask you to start your testimony in 1988, when you and Bruce met.
Okay.
That was in London.
That was in London. I'd gone down to London to be a physiotherapy student, and Bruce had moved down from Inverness to London to do nursing. Eventually, he went to do nursing when he was down there. And we were doing agency nursing to pay the bills, and we met. Actually, you just put on the same ward on the same day, and we met through work.
And what was your response when Bruce told you he had haemophilia?
Well, he was very open. We went for lunch after our shift, and I burnt a pizza, and he told me he was a haemophiliac, and I just blurted out, "Oh, have you got AIDS then?" As a 20-year-old, yes, foot-in-mouth disease I had then, yes.
Now, Bruce didn't know at that time that he had been infected with hepatitis C,
No,
but he was aware of being unwell.
yes.
What kind of symptoms was he experiencing at that time?
Well, shortly after we got together, he was struggling to keep up his nursing studies. He was struggling to keep up the extra shifts he was doing to pay the bills. I remember one occasion we went to visit a cousin, and we slept over at their house. And I remember during the night that the bed was so wet that I just thought he had wet the bed. It was so wet. I was absolutely just mortified. I realised, later that it wasn't urine, but we had soaked through the sheet. Well, he had soaked through the sheet and the mattress. And yes, I was embarrassed by that.
And you describe in your statement he was experiencing nausea, fatigue.
Yes, weight loss, yes.
But doctors were telling him that it was all in the head.
Yes.
And you've said he was told if it wasn't AIDS, so there was nothing to worry about.
Yes.
And you referred to him being described as an AIDS wannabe.
Yes.
It was in the course of 1990 when you were pregnant with your first child,
Mm-hmm.
And you were due to get married,
Yes.
that Bruce was told that he had hepatitis C.
Yes. He'd moved centres to, oh gosh, the name's just gone out of my head. One in London.
St Thomas's.
St Thomas's, thank you. And they were trialling the new Hep C test, so he took part in the new Hep C test.
And I'm just going to just read a few lines from Bruce's statement about how he recalls being told. He says this: "The doctor actually told me that I had hepatitis C standing in a clinical room doorway. He didn't even come into the room. He told me he was running late for clinics. I walked into the unit at St Thomas's Hospital and said hello to the doctor. I asked if the result had come back. He said it probably had, but he was in a rush as he had a clinic to do. I went into the treatment room because at that point they were trying to get on top of my bleeding disorder. I had severe problems with my right leg and had difficulty walking. I was connected up to a needle and the doctor came back into the room but didn't enter the room itself. He just stood in the doorway leaning against the door jamb. I remember it as clear as day. He told me I was positive. He told me it was just a mild infection and not to worry about it. I was actually working in a hepatic unit at the time, so I asked what he meant by a mild infection and what the implications were. He said I might get lymphoma, liver cirrhosis or liver cancer, but that I probably wouldn't. No information was given to help me understand and manage my infection. All I was told was that it might develop into lymphoma, liver cirrhosis or liver cancer, but that I probably wouldn't. Now, Bruce came back and told you
Yes.
that he had been given this diagnosis of hepatitis C. What can you remember about that?
There was a mixture of emotions because he had been unwell and there didn't seem to be any reason for it. Actually, having a diagnosis almost made it better because at least it wasn't all in his head. At least there was some reason for him being unwell. But he was really, really worried that either he'd infected me or the baby.
And you've said in your statement that you weren't told or given any information about the risks of transmission to the baby, and you weren't offered an HCV test.
No.
And Bruce became very concerned about the risks of cross-infection following his diagnosis.
Yes, he was doing home treatment and I'd been helping. I'd been putting the IV in for him and he stopped me from helping with that. Yes, and yes, he was just devastated that he was so worried for me and the baby.
Now you and Bruce and baby moved to Lincolnshire in late 1991.
Yes.
And how did Bruce's health develop over the following years?
He continued to have the night sweats. He vomited virtually every day, several times a day. He was prescribed build-up drinks by the GP. He was very emotional. He's very angry. He had massive amounts of fatigue, struggled to hold down a job, and sort of expressed feelings of feeling useless and being no use to us.
And he did attempt various forms of work, but he was unable because of his health to sustain those employments for very long.
Yes.
You then had to go back to work full-time more quickly than you'd planned to.
Yes, I think my daughter was 4 months old when I went back to work full-time.
And you've recalled in your witness statement one occasion in which your daughter called you Maureen, which was the childminder's name.
Yes. So she was at the childminder all day while I was at work.
And that hadn't been your plan initially?
No, absolutely not. We'd always thought we were going to jointly parent the children, and I wanted to have some time to be a mum, and Bruce wanted some time to be a dad, and this was our idea that we would do that.
And during this period when you were living in Lincolnshire, how were things for you financially?
We were in a council house. We'd moved up to a council estate. And things were tough. To pay a childminder, Bruce wasn't really earning very much. The benefit system seems to be against us. He was having to fight to be able to claim benefits that he should have had. I do remember one day getting eviction notice through the door from the council because we were late paying our rent that month, and it was just 1 month. But to have that letter, it was just awful.
Now, Bruce then went on a course of interferon for the hepatitis C. You think it was, I understand, a trial?
I believe so. It was his centre had moved to the Hallamshire in Sheffield at that time, and I do remember going to see the doctor prior to him starting, and the doctor saying, your liver enzymes are so bad, there's no question that you'll be taken on. And I think he must have been quite late getting taken on because it seemed to be quite rushed that he started the trial.
And your statement says that in retrospect, you suspect that the dosage he was given may have been too high.
Again, I'm not sure where I've got that information from, but I'm sure that I've heard that the initial trials, the dose, they were working with the dosages, and subsequently the doses were reduced.
Bruce's description of the side effects of that course of interferon is put in this way: nobody had made me aware about the side effects of treatment. I was told that interferon would give me mild flu symptoms. If what I experienced is a mild flu, I'd like to know what they think a bad flu is. Mentally and physically, I've never recovered from that experience.
Yes, I would.
What can you recall about the symptoms and side effects that Bruce experienced during the interferon trial?
I have visions of him with the needle waiting to stick it into his stomach, and him in tears, knowing that he had to do it, but knowing that how poorly he was going to feel after it. He was trying to continue to work at this time. Again, the symptoms just were, he had a brain fog, he really couldn't think clearly. He was angry, he was, I wouldn't say aggressive, but he's very angry and short-tempered, I suppose is a better way to say it. And often we felt like we were on eggshells, and there were times when he wouldn't get dressed for days. And then another time I do remember coming back to the house with my daughter, having collected her, and he'd gone to bed and locked the doors and left the key in, and I couldn't wake him up, and we're banging on the door trying to get into the house with Bruce fast asleep upstairs. And another time he'd put his pan on the stove and fallen asleep and burnt through the pan and caused smoke damage throughout the kitchen.
And what was the outcome of the treatment itself?
The treatment cleared the virus.
Bruce's statement and your statement explains that essentially the symptoms never stopped.
No, absolutely not.
And it was at that point that Bruce started to really involve himself in campaigning.
Yes. It was the start of when the Manor House group was set up. So he was driving to meetings a little bit further south from where I'm meeting other people and hearing their stories. And I think having spoken to each other and working with each other, they suddenly realised, hang on, it's not just me. We're all suffering with the same consequences.
You'd become pregnant with Robbie in 1996, having been told that Bruce had become clear of hepatitis C. It was seen, I think, by both of you, your statement says, as a good moment to have a second child.
Yes, we'd, in the 6 years between our children, and in that time, before Bruce had treatment, we'd had difficulty coping, and we'd been to Relate and counselling, and we'd sort of said, that's it, no more children, that's it, it's not fair. But after being told that you're clear of the virus, you will get better, you'll be healthy, I'd always wanted a second child, so this was a definite choice to have a second child.
But the symptoms never having gone away, what did it feel like for you and for Bruce, having made this decision, but nothing had got better?
It was difficult. My pregnancy with my son was very difficult. I had multiple threatened miscarriages. And I do remember thinking maybe it would be better if this child doesn't survive.
You, again, had to go back to work earlier than you'd planned.
Yes.
Because Bruce's health was such that he, despite trying, wasn't able to keep working.
So we sort of took the decision, really, that he would be the parent at home and I would work. And we sort of worked that out, and that's just how we had to get on with it, really.
But he was still experiencing a lot of the same symptoms,
Yes.
nausea.
Yes, night sweats. I mean, we would be up in the night changing sheets, and yes, and his weight would drop. My daughter remembers him having to stop the car, driving her to nursery school to be sick. And that's one of her first memories, is her dad being that poorly, and him lying on the settee, and he wasn't able to cope with looking after our son as in the way that he had hoped to. So it necessitated us, I mean, first we got help through a charity, and gradually he started at a nursery, and it started as a day and then 2 days, and eventually he was full-time at a nursery.
What was the impact on Bruce of his health conditions, his physical health conditions at that time?
I think he felt worthless, but at the same time, he was wanting to not campaign, but to get to the bottom of this, to find out exactly what had happened, and to find the truth out. So as much as he was poorly, he was unwell, he started devoting more and more and more of his energies into researching what had happened, into campaigning, and going on the TV, newspaper articles, this sort of thing, to try and highlight the case.
His statement describes depression and a sense of social isolation at this time as well.
Yes, we didn't socialise at all. Bruce found it very difficult to coping with crowds, and also it's that first question when you're introduced to somebody new. It's, oh, what do you do for a living? And if you say, if you don't want to tell people the whole story, not that we hid it, I absolutely didn't hide what had happened to us, but it was that difficult question. People really don't want to know the ins and outs, and if he said he was a house husband, which is what he sort of started to say to people, again, a man staying at home and his wife going to work, he felt that lessened him and took away his masculinity, I suppose.
You went through a period in the late 1990s, early 2000s when you were both struggling and your own mental health was suffering.
Yes. Bruce was just so poorly, really. I think that's just so ill all the time, and I had 2 young children. My son didn't sleep, so we were all sleep deprived. And on one occasion, a long-time patient that I'd had, I was a community physio by this time, had died, and I went to her funeral. And I remember it was pouring rain, and I got in the car, and I went to go to my next patient, which just happened to be near a river. And I drove the car up to the edge of the river, and I sat there thinking, do you know, this would end everything, all the pain, if I just drove the car into the river. And at that point, I had 2 young children, and I think that just always brings you back. And I rang Bruce, and he just said, come home now. Just come home. And I did. I managed to drive the car and go home, and then I saw my GP and got signed off work and started antidepressants and counselling and trying to cope with it.
You and Bruce did separate for a while.
Just immediately after that, again, it was a case of trying to separate myself from the pain. And I moved out of the family home into a rented property nearby, and took the children, and had to take on huge debt to furnish it and pay the first month's rent. And I was still off sick at this time, so I wasn't on sick leave, but it was just my way of coping. In
2004, Bruce received a letter, we've seen a number of such letters, about the potential risk of VCJD.
Yes.
What can you recall about that?
Well, we have to almost go back a bit from that. Bruce and I were watching the VCJD story in the press, and we just turned to each other one day and said, these are young people. I wonder how many of these people have given blood. So we wrote to, I don't know, we asked our doctors, we asked the Haemophilia Society, could this be an issue? And we were told we were scaremongering and we were frightening people and we should shut up. So when the letter came out, it confirmed yet again that we had been lied to, that we had, they tried to placate us by saying there's no problem. But actually, yeah, you stop believing people because time after time after time, your concerns and theories and thoughts are proved right.
And Bruce says in relation to the fear of VCJD, there's nothing that terrifies me more than CJD. HIV was a scary disease, but the idea of losing yourself, of having your personality and everything you are eaten away by death of your brain cells, and to end up being completely dependent and unable to even intellectually interact because of CJD terrifies the hell out of me and always has done.
Yes.
This is a real risk for people like me. People need to sit up and take notice of that.
Yeah.
Bruce is, and has been for a number of years, profoundly distrustful of the medical profession and medical treatments, and hasn't wanted to try any further treatments.
Yes. When the new treatment started to come out, he was sort of asked over and over again, despite the fact that he's PCR negative, that we thought he was, for want of a better word, cured of Hep C, that they still feel that he should have this treatment. But he sort of said, actually, I've been there at the start before. I've been a guinea pig, for want of a better phrase, before, and he just didn't trust that it was going to be safe. So he's refused to have treatment until now, and it's actually speaking to other people who've been through the treatment that's starting to make us think, well, maybe it is okay. But it's because of speaking to all these people out here, not to doctors, that sort of is reassuring us.
And you yourself, as a physiotherapist, working as part of the health service, what's the impact been on you practicing your profession of having in the background these questions and concerns and this lack of trust?
I suppose I've been caught in between it, really, because my training and everything I see so much good work, but at the same time I see so much horrendous stories. And when I was working, I used to take on the cases that were long-term, that people who had maybe been written off by everybody else. So I started to understand that the needs of long-term conditions and people with long-term problems wasn't necessarily well catered for, and so I moved my practice towards that. You start to question everything. You start to distrust everything. When you're told something, you go away straight away and start to research it, because you need to understand it in your own way, rather than just relying on what somebody said, because you just don't feel like you're getting the whole story. They're cherry-picking the best bits without giving you the background information.
And you describe Bruce at this time being exhausted, unable to do many physical tasks. You used to go hill walking together, and he could no longer do that.
No, we didn't even go on a holiday together. When we lived in England, we would come up and visit his family, and when we moved to Scotland, we would then go back down. But I would take the children myself, because Bruce just couldn't cope with it. And even if we did go away, it would be a weekend in a caravan somewhere, collecting tokens from the newspaper, this sort of thing, because we couldn't afford anything more than that. But when we were away, I would take the children for the day and he would sleep.
And You've said in your statement that you think he has a form of post-traumatic stress disorder because of everything he's experienced.
I don't know if that's the right term, but I know the anxiety levels that he experiences when he has to go into hospital are such that we've actually walked out of hospital wards before. He's had experiences, and if I'm not there, it's often better if I can be there. But he's had experiences where, somebody says the wrong thing, and he can't control his anxiety levels.
Now, for many years, as many in this room will know, Bruce has been extensively involved in investigation, research and campaigning. And you describe in your statement that that's effectively become his life.
Yes. Yes.
What has the impact of that been on you?
I've said this so many times. It's the first thing that he will speak about in the morning, and it's the last thing he will speak about before he goes to bed. And within the day, no matter what the conversation is, we don't go half an hour without him discussing it, without somebody phoning up, without him looking on internet, and no matter where we go, what we do, he's constantly speaking to people, looking at things, putting two and two together, and he's done this from his bed a lot of the time. He doesn't have the energy to run around and do. And literally, I would come home from work and I would try to ring him from work sometimes to say, I'm on my way, do we need shopping, that sort of thing. And every single night, the phone was busy. Every night, and I'd get home and he'd still be on the phone, speaking to somebody about one thing or another, either supporting somebody or getting very angry about things. So that's what we had to deal with.
You've described it in your statement, in some respects, as being toxic and damaging. What do you mean by that?
Yes, I mean, we're talking about something that happened so many years ago, and there have been so many opportunities that the state could have taken to reduce what the harm that this had done. You can imagine every time he's gone to talk to so many politicians, been to Parliament, he's had so many TV interviews, phone, and every time you have pieces of evidence that seem to be smoking guns, and nobody wants to know. And, when you hear, there's going to be a question asked in Parliament, you think, maybe this time they're going to put it right. And every time you get some lame excuse by the government to put you down or to hide it away, and you just feel you've just been knocked back again, and you can only be knocked down so many times. So you raise your level up, and then you're knocked down, and every single time, and it's just gone on for so long. And the evidence is there.
You've explained in your statement that this has given Bruce his purpose.
Yes.
But he's also seen so many people die.
Yes. 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 Over the years, we've attended so many events, and there's so many people. I mean, some stick in my mind because I met them as well. I wasn't always there because I was working. And then meeting their loved ones after they've died, knowing that they've died in the most horrendous ways. Bloated, yellow, attached to machines in intensive care, having amputations, losing everything. And these people were Bruce's friends, and he would say to them, and they would say to him, don't give up the fight. Don't give up the fight, keep going. And he'd say, I am fighting for you. I am continuing, not just for my family, for everybody's family. And we've often felt within the family that we are second place to that fight. But we understand why that has happened. I don't think you would put up with it if you didn't know the pain and the people's stories behind it. I would have walked out and left Bruce. I wouldn't have got back together. But just simply because it's 10 green bottles, you know? There's just less and less all the time to shoulder that burden. I mean, Bruce says he stands on the shoulders of dead men. Well, yeah, there's nobody there to support him. He's there doing it with, he's not on his own by any means, far from it. But there's just this small group of people that are keeping going because of the horrendous stories that we know, the horrendous deaths that we've seen.
Your daughter's described that in this way in her statement. People he knew were dying, and I recall he had this black address book, and when people died he would cross out their names. I remember coming home and there was a hallway connected to an office that he could use. I could hear him crying. I would see the black book open and he had the phone and he knew another person had died.
Yes. Yes.
You had cancer
Yes.
in 2014.
Yes.
And following that you've taken retirement.
Yes.
And one of your passions now are ponies and carriage riding. But what's the impact been on you over the decades that we've briefly been talking about? Those decades, how's it taken its toll on you?
I mean, there's physically, because Bruce either has been physically unwell to do things, and then all his energy that he has had has been in campaigning. I've had to be the breadwinner. I've had to do the housework. I've had to do the gardening, everything. So I've been a sole parent almost. That's how it's felt. I felt a huge burden to pay the bills, to keep working. I would have loved to have worked at a lower level or worked part-time, but I didn't have the opportunity to do that. Even with my wages coming in, money was tight. We were always juggling a credit card or a loan, and there never seemed to be any money for what we needed. And how can you save for tomorrow when you don't know if you're going to have a tomorrow? So I was trying to support the children so that, and we couldn't shield them. My daughter has said just last week that she knew when we were trying to hide things, and that made her much more upset than ever. And it's also that Bruce has also been through so much that if you've got a cold or anything, it's nothing. It's really nothing compared to what he's going through. So you would feel, I can't be poorly because I'm nothing like as poorly as he is. And I went through chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and apart from a few days after each treatment, I would still say I was fitter going through that than Bruce has had for nearly 30 years.
Bruce has recognised in his statement this. He says, "My infection has had an absolutely and completely devastating effect on my family. It has completely changed the way their lives have gone from their earliest point." Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, yes.
I'll ask just a little about the effect on your children.
Yes.
They've both given statements to the inquiry. You've described your daughter as a very gentle soul who holds everything in. Mm-hmm. And she says in her statement she's grown up acutely aware of her dad being ill, and that's affected how she deals with people.
Yes, and she's never had that security of knowing that her dad was going to be there the next day or the next day. So living with that insecurity, she, again, just recently she admitted to me that she would go to the library after school hoping that I would be in from work before she got in, because she was terribly worried that she would find her dad dead and this is as a 11, 12-year-old. And she had episodes at school where she ran away one day and we had the police called from school. And she's been to counselling through child services and has continued to have severe mental health issues since then. She's been hospitalised twice in a psychiatric ward. And she spent her 21st birthday on a psychiatric ward. And when we went in to see the consultant, obviously she talked about her dad. And I was called in to see the consultant psychiatrist, and he turned around and said, "Wherever you have to choose between your husband and your daughter. Your husband's campaigning is so awful that if he continues to campaign, your daughter will never be well." And at the time, I was raging about that. I was so angry. How dare he say that? And now, my daughter was... And speaking with a different psychiatrist, I reflected on that and thought, actually, he was right. But he went about it the wrong way. If he had just said, look, this is very damaging, what's happening, and do X, Y, and Z, but expecting me to leave my husband, in no uncertain terms, it was leave your husband or your daughter won't be well. No, I went back to my daughter at that point and said, please don't think I don't love you enough to put you first, because I will always put you first, but I just don't think it's right. I don't think this is the right way. I don't think that's going to help us. And indeed, at that point, I think I don't know if that helped her, but she did recover for a while. She went back to college. She then went back to university. In spite of everything, she's got a good degree.
Your son, you say, and he says, struggled with the fact he wasn't able to do with his dad what other children's fathers did. They couldn't kick a football around in the garden because of Bruce's ill health.
Yes, yes. We didn't go out to theme parks for the day or anything like that. He just wasn't fit for that. So whenever we did that, it was just me and my sister or friends or whatever. But he didn't have that relationship with his father, no.
And he said in his statement he thought for a long time that his dad was going to die, and that the idea of coming home from school to find his father dead was normal to him.
Yes. I mean, however rational that is or isn't, that's what's in their mind. And it is Russian roulette. Somebody said that the other day. There is no rhyme or reason why, one person has died and another, and nobody could tell us. So, yes. So, of course, when you're in the dark times, your brain goes to that dark place.
And he has said in his statement he would like all the campaigning and infected blood conversations to stop.
Yes. And we all would. Let's face it, everybody here would. But by God, we're not going to let it go until this is sorted out. And in spite of everything, we are standing together because we want to see this done properly. We want to see the people that have contributed to this, for want of a better phrase, being brought to task.
And you've said this at the conclusion of your statement, Christine. I think it's been a compromise between the campaign being toxic and the fact that if Bruce did not take part in the campaign, then who would do it? He feels a sense of responsibility, and you say in your statement that you understand that.
Yes. Yes.
And then you say this, I'd always known that Bruce might die from his infections for the last 20 plus years. He is extremely upset every time someone else dies. Age 54 is the average age that other haemophiliacs who've been infected passed away. I believe this means that Bruce is hyper-aware of his own mortality. It feels like we live on a knife edge. forced to live for today, but planning for a future that he might not have.
Yes, his 54th birthday. Again, I know it's an arbitrary date, but it was very significant, and he was, his mood was very low around that time. Yes.
Christine, those are the questions I had for you, but is there anything further you would like to say?
I've just made a couple of notes. I was asked here to come and speak about the family and tell our story. I've shared secrets with you that I've not told anybody else. I've never told anybody that I almost committed suicide. But I don't want anybody to go away thinking, poor wee you. We don't want pats on the head. We don't want sympathy. What we want is truth and justice. I am angry. I might be upset, but I am so angry. Not just of the infections, but that we have been forced, that victims who are in the worst situation in their life are forced to keep trying to get this story sorted. That the very people whose lives are blighted, who have very little energy, have to use that bit of energy to fight this, to keep it going, to support everybody else. I am so angry every time I hear an MP or a minister saying, oh, we're very sorry. If you're very sorry, you do something about it. You make it right. And if one more fatuous, overstuffed minister says anything to me, I don't know what I'll do. Or maybe I'll be throwing paint at the Parliament next time. I would love to hope that there will be an end to this. I would love to hope that I can walk into a hospital, because even now my anxiety levels are such that I'm anxious when I go into hospital. I used to work in one. How do we rebuild that trust? I dare say there's people here that will never, ever be able to fully trust a doctor again. And yet we're reliant on them to keep us healthy, to keep us well. Maybe a good starting point would be if they told the story, they came clean, and they were absolutely honest, because I don't believe that they've told the story before. I turned up to the publication of the Penrose inquiry 4 days after I'd had chemotherapy, hoping that we would have good news, and to stand at the back, and I'm sorry, Bill, I was one of the ones shouting at the back at that, to stand at the back and be told we should feel sorry for the medics because they had been affected too. I was the first person to shout whitewash. And I was so angry. I had turned up, and it was only the fact that we met up with Shona Robison afterwards at the event arranged by Haemophilia Scotland. And she said, forget about it. We are going to try in Scotland to put it right. And the Scottish scheme of support has been so much better than what the rest of the UK have offered. Not that it's perfect by any means, and there's some people who have had nothing from it that should have had some help. But I mean, there was so much hope going into the Penrose inquiry that this was an end to it, that we could finally get our lives back, that I would get my husband back, that we could spend time, that we could go half an hour without discussing what the latest thing that they'd found, the latest piece of information that they'd uncovered. In the course of the campaigning work, we have had great kindness shown to us by people in the arts community. We've had plays put on, we've had books written, we've had stories and TV things. And the kindness and these people just can't believe that we are still in the situation we're in now. But the kindness and the support of these people is in stark contrast to the collective responses of the health service, of state and welfare services, social welfare, who only seem to add to this torment that we're going through. And I would say the torment of living with the ill health isn't as bad as, I've heard stories this week that have just made me cry, and I appreciate that everybody's story is individual, and some of them, it just breaks your heart. And I thought I was hardened to this, but actually the stories I've heard that my teeth hurt. And I'm angry. I'm not just upset. I am absolutely angry that this should be allowed to happen.
So, thank you. I'm just going to ask Mr. O'Neill if there's anything further. Nothing further. Sir.
You've given us a remarkably clear and compelling account, in particular of a driven man. Don't answer this question unless you feel you can or would want to. But at some stage, this inquiry will have to end, whatever its conclusions may be. What have you had any discussion, the two of you, about how life will then be?
Well, everything. Well, I have my ponies. I've had to wait. I couldn't afford to have them until I got cancer and had got my, thankfully I could get insurance. My husband can't get insurance. But we would just like to live a quiet life. My husband would like to play music and write and do art. And if he could, he would want to garden and go out for lunch and sleep at night without worrying about this. There was just one thing actually that I forgot. One of the things is the ongoing lack of trust, and even now when you go to clinics as a haemophiliac, they take syringes and syringes and syringes of blood, and you're seen as a awkward bugger if you turn around and say, what are you taking that for? And I think it would be a very small thing for it be standard practice that the nurse or the doctor would say, right, I'm going to test this, I'm going to be looking at this. And a lot of people, it might not bother them, they might not be worried about it, but for some of us, we do want to know that there's not a vial gone off for some new thing, and that there's nothing new in the future. My daughter is a carrier, and after the evidence we heard last week, we had a tearful session, and she said, do you know, my genetics mean that this will never go away. The infections, we might get to the bottom of the infections, but it's what's next. And she, to the point where she said she won't have children. And if she adopts, although we would love the child and she would love the child as much as a biological child, there would always be a reminder that she has adopted because of what has happened to us here. But we would like a quiet life. We would like to, just get on with it. And because of my cancer diagnosis and because of Bruce's diagnosis, we don't have that security. So we just have to live our lives to the best we possibly can, doing the things we'd like to do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very, very much indeed. And in particular for, as you said, telling us things that you've never told anyone before. We've been privileged. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you for having the opportunity. We really welcome the opportunity to tell the stories. As much as it's hard, it's really important.
Well, we'll take a break now until 1:30.
Thank you, sir.
1:30.